if you boil it down into what this course is about working with people, okay? And all of the concepts that we've talked about so far relates to these interactions that go on between people. And this latest concept is known as groups and teams. And probably the thing that you'll be doing most at work is working in some form of a group or some form of a team. You'll certainly be working in some form of a group, and you may be working in some sort of a team. And there is a slight difference between groups and teams, and we'll look at those differences. Groups exist pretty standardly. Teams are like a purpose-built items that is set up to do something specific, okay? So a group could exist generally, whereas a team tends to be more specific. But essentially, it's the principles that exist in all of them are the same. So what we're going to look at in this section really is this concept of groups and some of the issues in groups and some of the issues in teams and how we can best deal with them. Okay, so we're going to look at defining what a team is and defining, this concept of a team, a formal team or an informal group. A team is formal, guaranteed, and a group tends to be more informal. We're going to discuss group development. We're going to explain how group size, diversity, and all these factors impact how well a group works together. We're going to look at this concept of norms, roles, status, and the consequences of stickiness, group cohesiveness, how groups work together, and the dynamics of social loafing, which is one of my favorite terms in organizational behavior. That's just lazy people. And understand this concept of virtual teams. And man, have we got some experience in that over the last year. So if you want to know what we're covering here, this is really Unit 5. And it covers Chapter 5 in the book, okay? The very, very, very first thing that we need to really establish here is what exactly is a group? What exactly is this bunch of people? Well, a group consists of two or more people that are interacting some way. There has to be interaction, and there has to be more than one person. And oftentimes that interaction leads to what's called interdependence. In other words, I rely on you to do your job and you rely on me to do my job. If you're making a part and then you're handing it to me to finish the part, I can't do my job unless you do yours, right? You need to be able to hand me the part that you just finished so I can add pieces to it. My ability to work is going to be absolutely dependent on you. So this interdependence and the interactivity and the fact that we got multiple people involved creates some of the challenges that come of groups, okay? Now, groups tend to have a common goal, particularly at work. If you think about at work, if you're working in an office, that office does something. If you're working for Eastern Health, for example, in their accounts receivable office, their job is to collect monies somehow or another from various people. So that's accounts receivable. If you're working in accounts payable, their job is for paying vendors. So you can see that different groups would have different goals. So the interaction, I say, is a critical thing here, and that's what causes the opportunities or presents the opportunities and causes the problems. So, and groups exert a tremendous amount of influence on us. We can think about how other people affect us in our attitudes, our beliefs, our values, all get changed or manipulated or nudged as a result of working in groups. Now, the thing is, bad things can happen, but also good things can happen that way. So again, we need to think about what impact does a group have on us? And groups are really what we call social mechanisms. They're formed because people are natural social animals, and that these are just outcomes of that natural sense of getting together to achieve some goal. And as I say, we acquire our beliefs, values, attitudes, and behaviors. Now, I'll go back to the very first day. The very first day in the course, I showed you the little video. We talked about Lord of the Flies. And that'll be a recurring theme through this course. If we think about the group of kids that were on that island, that they formed up into groups very quickly. We saw different groups form. We saw the interaction of people in groups and how groups didn't necessarily get along and the conflict that resulted from that. And how the group influenced the individual. You know, you had to have the conch in order to speak. Okay, you had to have the shell. And if you didn't have the shell, you weren't allowed to speak. So rules come about because of group interactions. Now, if we think about groups in the work environment, there are really two types of groups, two very broad types of groups in the work environment. The first are formalized groups. Now, these are groups that are set up by the work itself. So the very fact that you're in the accounting department and you're doing the accounts receivable means that you are in a group that has that very specific task, and that group was formed by the organization. You're there because that is in the organizational structure, that is what you guys do. Now, these formal groups are all over organizations. If you think about the instructors at the college, or if you think about the groups of the guidance counselors at the college, these sorts of things, you know, that would be a formalized group. Now, formal groups, they're good, and people are put in those groups as opposed to voluntarily going in those groups. So, you know, there can be some issues with it, but those groups are put together with a very defined purpose in mind. We are going to achieve the goal that is set out for us. That's what that group does. Informal groups, on the other hand, are your friends at work. And your informal groups and your formal groups could overlap. There's no problem with a formal group also being the members of a formal group being the members of an informal group if they're your friends. Normally, informal groups are not designed by the work. They're designed by you. The work is not going to tell you this is who you have to be friends with. You're going to decide that. So an informal group is a group of people that get together because of factors other than that determined by work. So they happen to work on the same floor. They happen to take the bus together. They happen to live on the same street. These sorts of things are what contribute to members becoming members of informal groups. So formal work groups, again, are established by the organization. They're designed to achieve the goals of the organization. And we could think about, you know, common formal groups. A manager and the employees that report to the manager would be a group. Informal groups are groups that emerge naturally in response to common interests of organizational members. Informal groups can either be helpful or hurtful to the organization, depending on the norms of the behavior. You know, do the groups work to bitch and complain about the organization, or do they spend their time thinking about, you know, how they can have fun and improve the work? Like, for example, the social club at the environment. At the group. So here's a little summary graphic that kind of covers all of these big issues about formal versus informal groups. You know, the formation, formal group is deliberately structured, whereas an informal group, voluntarily structured. If we think about the actual structure of the group, the structure is very defined. You know, we know who the boss is, we know who the employees are, and the like. Whereas in a informal group, there is no real structure. It's just a bunch of people together. The relationship is very professional at work. We're together because we work together. Whereas in a non-formal group or an informal group, it tends to be personal. People are friends, or they know one another and they like one another, and they'll work together. The size of the group, in a formal group, the group size could be large. It could be small too, but it tends to be larger. Whereas a voluntary group tends to be just a group of friends. So it's how many people can fit in a car normally. In terms of nature and life, well, the nature of the group really, in a formal group, really depends on the group. How things go depends on how the group. Whereas in a voluntary group, it really depends on the members. So the group where it's more formalized have to work together. So it really depends on how the group operates. Friends don't have to work together. They don't have to deal with one another if they don't want to. So it really depends on the individual members. And there is no leadership in a voluntary group, but in a work group, there certainly is a clear, defined leader. So we want to contrast the group that we just talked about with teams. And teams are really a special kind of group. They're set up to make 2 and 2 equal 5, or 1 and 1 equal 3. The idea of putting a work group together into a team is to achieve some very defined, specific, measurable goal. Okay, so if our office, for example, is going to have a conference, okay, we're going to have a conference, we could set up a team of individuals whose job it is to organize the conference. So the team has a very specific goal. Let's get the conference organized. So the idea is that one will bring certain skills, another one will bring a different type of skills, another one will bring a different type of skills again. Combining all those skills, you will have this greater synergy. Synergy just means that the sum is greater than the individual parts. The whole is greater than the sum of the individual parts. So we got a really good work group and we can get a lot done. A team is more generally used to describe groups in organizational setting, and the term sometimes is used interchangeably, sometimes not. So many organizations now use team-based work arrangements in an attempt to improve efficiency, quality, customer satisfaction, innovation, and speed of production. Toyota is a good example of that. What Toyota do is they put together teams of people who are engaged in building cars. So there is a team, a B team, a C team, and those teams are people that always work together, and they always are involved in doing some part of the production process for cars. So the team is considered to have a relatively small number of people with complementary skills. They complement one another. One brings a certain type of skill, another one brings something else. And they're all committed to that common purpose and performance goals. And they find themselves what's called mutually accountable. I need to do my job, you need to do yours, otherwise nothing gets done. So groups become teams when they meet the following conditions. So what distinguishes a team from a group? Well, a team members share leadership. There's no specific leader in that. Both individuals and teams as a whole share accountability for the work of the team. So all the team members are jointly accountable. Everyone is responsible for everyone else. The team develops its own purpose or mission. Okay, so the team has a very specific, organize the conference. The team works on problem solving continuously rather than just at scheduled meetings. So the team is interacting. And the team's measure of effectiveness is the team's outcomes and goals rather than the individual outcomes. Do we have the conference? Was the conference a success? That's really a function of how well the teams work together, and we can measure the success based on that. So management has found that teams are more flexible and responsive to changing events than traditional departments. So teams tend to be, I'm going to call it the new flavor of management. If we can put people together in teams, they work together, they have their own specific work group, so they all are jointly accountable to one another. They don't need a whole degree of leadership because the team is the leader itself. So these sorts of things have made this type of team-based management very popular in the last number of years. Teams too are quick to put together, quick to get to work, quick to change, and just quick to get the job done effectively. So teams, a lot of people like teams because of that. You can bring them together, get them to do the work, and there it is done. And teams also allow for greater task identity. Oh, I'm on the team that's responsible for organizing a conference. Don't I feel good about that? So that's what we mean by task identity. People can relate to the job because it's not so big that you don't know what your role in it is. You're not just a cog in the wheel, you are the wheel. So team members working on tasks together tends to be motivational in that sense. So we have to be able to make that distinction between a team and a group. And really, groups are more general, teams are much more specific. But regardless if it's a group or a team, it's more easily demonstrated with a team. Groups go through stages. They go through a very distinct group of stages. As I said to you, a lot of work has been put into watching people work since World War II because we need to think about how we can do things more efficiently. So a lot of these work psychologists, I'll call them, the people who have done a lot of research in watching people work, have come up with a theory that explains why groups work as they do, or why teams work as they do. And the one that stands out above all the rest is this 5-stage model. And this 5-stage model is something that I think that if you've ever worked in a team, you'll be able to relate to. Essentially, what this says is that while employees often know each other before a new group is formed, simple familiarity does not replace the necessity for a team to develop through these 5 stages. There are identifiable stages to a typical group's development. Each stage presents the members with a series of challenges they must master in order to achieve the next stage. So it seems like a giant game of Survivor, right? We got to think about people coming together, and they're going to have some opportunities and challenges there. The opportunity to meet people, but the challenges in dealing with people. And every single team is going to face this same thing. You're dealing with new and people in a new situation. So the researchers have come out and said, you know, really, we can kind of break this process down into 5 distinct stages. The first stage is something called forming. A team needs to form. So the team comes together. And when a team comes together, they don't necessarily know one another. They're very different. They're individuals who are put together into a team. They're not a team. They are a bunch of individuals, okay? They're brought together. There's little agreement. There's not a clear purpose. They're going to need some guidance and direction. There's a lot of, what am I doing here, right? This is really what we call the forming stage. And if you think about the first time you sat down in a classroom, when you came to the college last year, you guys had the experience of doing this, and you sat down in the classroom, and you don't know anybody in the classroom. Think of that very first day, okay? That very first day, or that first 20 minutes, is really a forming stage. You're not very comfortable at that stage because you don't know anyone. You don't really know what you're doing there. You're not sure if you should be there. There's very unclear where we're going with this. You know, what have I got myself into now? That type of thing. So the forming stage is something that you feel at the very initial part. And you know, because of that, everybody's feeling the same way. And because of that, people are antsy. And oftentimes, there's some conflict that emerges at that early stage. And that conflict is not a bad thing. The conflict is normal because everybody has to kind of feel out what their role in this team is going to be. And because of that, they're all trying to jockey for position, I'll call it. And this jockeying leads to conflict. And as things move along, people are going to be looking for, I have to understand what I'm doing here, increased clarity. I'm going to have to establish myself in a group. If you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, that we talked about last time, we said, okay, well, we've got the safety needs. We've got our, basic needs, our safety needs taken care of. Here we are, our social needs are taken care of. We're all here. Now I'm going to have to establish myself in the group. That's really looking for that higher level needs. That's going to motivate me. Where do I fit in this group? Am I the leader? I'm a follower. Where do I sit in the group? And people are going to be at that. And they're going to be struggling to find out where they are. And this is where you get into these power struggles as people try to grasp the leadership role. And people are going to be feeling not too good about it. So this is where some coaching gets involved, where people have to sit down and talk to one another rationally in order to kind of get a sense. And sometimes people might leave the group at this point. Okay, you may not have people get through that storming stage, but presumably most do. And when most do, they have to get through this. It's like an initiation, okay? They have to get through this storming stage, which is always difficult. And that initiation brings them into the next stage, which is called norming. And in the norming stage, people start thinking as one, as opposed to individuals. They start to think of themselves as one. So agreement, consensus, you have a clear understanding what your role is, where you fit. You're either at the top or in the middle or on the bottom. And people are getting comfortable with that. That's what's called norming. So a group will run into the norming stage. Once we've got our roles straightened away, we're ready to do the job. And that's where we move into the next stage, which is performing, which is actually doing the work. So we got a clear vision of what we're doing here, why we're here, our goals in this stage, what's our purpose here. It might be agreement, might be disagreement, doesn't really matter. But the fact of the matter is everyone's clear on what they're doing, and they're doing their job. They're all accountable to one another for their job. People will say, okay, you do this part, I'll do that part, that sort of thing. Once the task is done, this is particularly true with teams, once the task is done, you've performed, then the team disbands. It's called the adjourning stage. And the adjourning stage is kind of weird because you've worked so hard at something with this group of people that you become attached to them. And once the adjourning stage happens, people might feel lost. So the task is completed, good feelings about the achievement, and recognition, but it's like it's all over. So this 5-stage model is so common, and I want you to think about, have you ever been in a situation like this? Got some graphics here that just kind of reiterate it. Okay, forming the team acquaints and establishes ground rules, formalizes and preserves the members that, they're kind of treated as strangers in the beginning. And then storming, members start to communicate their feelings, but still view themselves as individuals rather than part of the team. They resist control by the group leaders and can show some hostility. Once we get through that, we norm, people feel part of the team and realizing they can achieve work if they accept other viewpoints. Performing, the team works in an open and trusting atmosphere where flexibility is key and hierarchy is of little importance. So they're all one. And finally, at the end, the adjourning stage, the team conducts an assessment of the year and implements a plan for transitioning roles, recognize members' contributions. And you can see here again the 5 stages, and as we move up, we're getting an increasing degree of interdependence. And, you're asking questions like, individual questions, how do I fit in? Things like, what are we doing here? Then we move on, what's my role? Who's in charge? Does it really matter? Norming, what do others expect me? Can we agree on the roles, work as a team? Performing, how can I best perform? Can we do the job properly? And then adjourning, what's next? How do we disband? We use the example of the Breakfast Club just to show how this team actually worked out, but there's lots of examples in it. You can relate to examples yourself of team building. I have a little video. I won't go through it because I've just gone through it there, but the little video basically explained the same thing I just talked about. What I wanted to launch today, though, is this issue of a special kind of team that does a very finite task, okay? We're not talking about big projects here. We're talking about nice, tight little projects, okay? We got to get an assignment done for PS2340, and there's 3 of us in the group, and it's a nice, tight little project. Here's the assignment. Okay, we're going to get together, we're going to have a meeting, and we're going to get this done, okay? That type of project. And this is something that came out of research that had to do with biology more than anything. It didn't have to do with business as much. But in this model of biology was also adapted for teams. And effectively what it talks about is teams have 2 distinct stages in their life. 2 distinct stages in terms of the stuff they do, not in terms of the formation, but in terms of the stuff they do. So when groups have a specific deadline, so we're under a deadline, okay, we've got to have their assignment done by, then the team is more focused, I'll call it, more focused in terms of achieving that particular goal. And it's a very specific goal. So we have this very simple little first stage that happens. And the first stage, or the first phase of getting the job done, looks at when this very first meeting happens, and this runs in parallel to the group formation, the 5 steps. When you come together, the first meeting kind of clears the idea of what we're going to do. So at that stage, we're gathering information. What is this assignment about anyway? What are we supposed to do? Well, and the group is just kind of finding its feet again. Very, very, I don't know. Uncertainty is rather high. Let's say that. That's what we have in phase 1. And this process then, this phase 1, kind of continues through until about halfway through the timeline. So let's assume the assignment has to be done next week. Here's our first meeting this week. We're going to meet again a couple more times. So we've met today. This is our first meeting. We're just trying to figure out what we're supposed to do, basically. So not like it's done in this first meeting and okay, we go away and we think about it some more and we think about it some more and we think about it some more. And suddenly we're halfway to the finish point. And this halfway to the finish point is really important because it's what's called a midpoint transition. I'll call it an epiphany. The midpoint transition occurs at the halfway point, and it marks a change in the group's approach. The original bit of work that was done was kind of all over the place, not too focused. Everyone's trying to figure out what it's all about. Once we get our head around it, the group looks and says, uh-oh, we're running out of time. We got to get moving. So the midpoint transition is really that point in time when you say, oh, we got to get this going, guys. Let's get focused on this now. And that's when you move into phase 2. Phase 2 is the doing stage, okay? Decisions and approaches are adopted, and then we start moving forward in phase 2. And really, phase 2 is the actual work gets done. When we realize we're under time pressure, we're kind of focused. We got to get this done by tomorrow night, guys. Let's get this done now. So it concludes with a final meeting that reveals a burst of activity. Oh, we're all trying to get it finished. We got to get to the finish line. And that's when the project is done. This is not all that complicated in terms of its concept. It's like, okay, we have to figure it all out. We realize we're running out of time, and then we get together and do it. Okay, that's essentially what punctuated equilibrium model says. And it applies to basically every type of project where the team members are not really under great pressure at the beginning, but as time marches along, the pressure builds in order to achieve a specific defined project that has to be done in a certain length of time. Is it kind of pushed to the end is what signifies in phase 2. And we get a lot more work done in phase 2 than we did in phase 1, where we're trying to figure it all out. You can see this little graphic here. This is one that you'll often see for demonstrating this, and that is like, here's phase 1, and the amount of performance in phase 1. If you look at the bottom, this is down here on the bottom, I'll call it. Let me get this little red marker here. Okay, down here, this is phase 1. We're going along. This is our first meeting, and we're basically, this is a timeline here. So right along here is the amount of time to the end of the project. So the project has to be done at B. So we get this done, and you notice that our performance is rather low. We're on the low end of the performance scale. And then someone says, holy jolly, we're running out of time. Let's get moving. And when that stage happens, this midpoint transition, we all start to work and get the project done. So it's like that epiphany moment here where you realize, oops, we're running out of time. We got to get cracking at this.